is Stigma, where we talk with leaders from many industries about how mental health and addiction have impacted their lives. Many people suffer silently from mental illness, addiction, depression, anxiety, and trauma. They never seek help because of stigma. In this podcast, host Stephen Hayes and his guests share their stories of recovery in order to encourage others to do the same. Here's Stephen.
Welcome back to another episode of the Stigma Podcast. Today we have Zak Williams with us, son of actor Robin Williams. Zak's going to talk to us about a lot to do with his own addiction and mental health, and he's going to talk to us about how the passing of his father impacted him. He's going to talk to us about how he dealt with addiction in his life and how he's found sobriety and wellness. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about how he does service work and how he gets involved as an advocate in the mental health community as well. So excited for this conversation. Without further ado, Zak, thanks for coming on, man.
Stephen, thanks for having me. It's an absolute privilege to be on.
Yeah, it's a privilege for me to get to have you come on and share your story and talk with our audience about mental health. And I wanted to get you to start by maybe telling our listeners a little bit about your journey and what you've been through and how you've got to this place where you've become an advocate for mental health.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've always struggled with depression and anxiety throughout a great portion of my life. I've sought ways to treat that depression and anxiety, generally not through pharmaceutical means, self-medicated using alcohol, cannabis, other things. Always felt uncomfortable in my own skin, but I just thought that was part of the course. That was normal. It's just something that you experience from childhood onwards. And so, throughout my teens and 20s, I was experiencing a lot of issues with my personal mental health, but just couldn't put quite my finger on it. Tried working out ways in which I could kind of treat the underlying symptoms, but they generally involved self-medicating, generally alcohol, and in a lot of circumstances led me down a path of being extremely uncomfortable and having a life that was not very manageable for me. So after my dad took his life, things got a whole lot more intense for me. I found myself drinking even more than I had been previously, and I was extremely anxious. I couldn't sleep at night. I was traumatized, and I was experiencing an emotional and a spiritual bottoming out. I felt awful, and the relationship I was in was falling apart, and I didn't know how to deal with my challenges. And so I was exposed to service work through a number of different means, but I found that through committing time and effort to volunteering around causes, it was actually healing me. And so the first thing I've really realized was helping me was volunteering, teaching financial literacy at San Quentin Prison. It was just something that was totally eye-opening. I was like, wow, I can commit my time to doing something that's interesting, helping and supporting others and being supported in my own right. And so that was kind of my first exposure to how supporting a cause in a way in which I was giving a lot of my time and effort and energy, not just say giving charitably or showing up for, a volunteer event or something along those lines, but actually committing to something on a deeper level. And so through that insight, I started delving into working with local organizations in the Bay Area, supporting them around things I knew, which relates very much to my background and consumer tech and gaming, video games, and also media. And so I could apply my skill set around integrated strategy, marketing, business development, those type of things, and apply it for good initiatives, generally with not-for-profits. So with that in mind, as I started working with mental health nonprofits, I found an enormous amount of affinity. And I realized that the more I shared my story with what I was dealing with, and the more it would draw me into a movement. And so coinciding with that, I realized I had to stop self-medicating. It just was ruining my life. Things were just, I wasn't able to take care of myself or the people around me in the way that I needed to. Went through a divorce, was not in a good space with my family and friends, and relationships that I found were important to me were degrading at a rate that I couldn't really believe. And so I also personally embarked upon a process of recovery.
What did that look like? I mean, what did recovery, how did you take those first few steps? I mean, how did you start down the path of recovery?
Well, I was miserable, and I didn't like drinking. It wasn't fun for me. It was just a way to kind of numb out, and experiencing things, feelings, and stuff were hard. And compounding that with the anxiety I was feeling, I was depressed over the time as well. I didn't know how to really take care of myself, and so I was like, something's up. It probably relates to alcohol. And I think maybe I can save certain relationships in my life at the time, my marriage and the like, and thought maybe if I stop drinking, things will get better.
Right.
And so I stopped, and I started participating in recovery programs. And at first it went well. It was something that was like, oh, wow, I'm actually feeling a little bit clear. I'm of course a nervous wreck, and not knowing how to manage my anxiety. And I was having a lot of problems with my personal relationships. And I thought, in my mind, oh, if I just stop drinking and start participating in a program, then everything will get better overnight.
That's how I felt, man. I remember walking into AA the first time and I heard these guys talking about the 12 promises, and they talked to all these guys that had been in the program for a while, would talk about all these great things that had happened in their life. And so I thought, sweet, I need that. I need all that to happen to me. And I remember opening up the AA book and going, okay, well, where's the first step? I need to get started on this process. Like, give me the good stuff. And it wasn't that simple.
No, no. And actually, things kind of got worse before they started getting better.
No doubt.
Because it's weird. I was participating in the program, and I was anxious and stressed and kind of miserable. And I thought, what's going on? I'm showing up. Don't things get better if you show up? And I didn't have a sponsor, and it was challenging for me at first. Needless to say, I found a sponsor, my first sponsor, and started learning that you just kind of have to, at least in early sobriety, just shut up and do it. Because I had taken a time being sober in my early 20s, and that was weird because I had gone to AA meetings and participated for a few months, and then I'm like, I got this. I'm showing up to AA meetings, and you know what? I'm fine at just having a few beers and going to AA meetings, because that seems like it's a good balance in life. And like,
right.
When
I love that.
When I started participating in my early 30s, it was just like, I was feeling dejected and lousy, and was just a bundle of nerves, and I didn't really know how to manage myself.
Yeah.
It's weird because, like, I had a career. Things were professionally, things were all right, and I was able to kind of deal with my job and those type of things in a reasonable manner. And then I'd get home on any given day, and I didn't know how to do anything else.
I love what you said about you didn't really like drinking. Because I felt that way. I mean, I had some drinks that I'd like, but I didn't really like drinking. I just had to do it. It was the only way to turn off the stuff in my head. It was the only way to turn off the things that I felt. It was the only way to deal with, I'm type 1 bipolar. And it was the only way to make that just insane drive and the mania go away, was to just pass out. I had to do it.
Yeah, I feel it. For me, it was more in kind of a OCD, anxious kind of way.
Yeah.
And, early childhood, I had a lot of obsessive traits, in terms of counting, things like that. And when I was in my teens, I discovered alcohol and cannabis. It made that go away. It kind of, it put a plug in obsessive thinking. It just caused this whole other set of problems. And so for me, it was all about kind of like, okay, you're in control, titrate, figure out how to, have X amount, and that'll put you in a mode where you're feeling okay and the stress and anxiety is gone and you're kind of in a euphoric state, and that's what it is. And if you're living life like that, you're constantly seeking to get in a state where you're just numbed out, and it doesn't leave the time in between to be really that enjoyable. And then when you're in the state where you're numbed out, it's not that enjoyable, because you kind of yearn for having a more stable way in which you experience the world.
Yeah. I found there's a statement in, I think it's in the AA book, and it's also in a couple of the other 12-step program materials, that says that we always would strive for this high, and it was never as good as we thought it would be when we got there. And then it always would get a little bit less good, even though we had to do more to try to get to where we thought we were going.
Yeah. There's never enough.
Another part of the program that you and I have talked about before is this idea of being vulnerable. And I think when you walk into an AA room, or when you go to help someone else, it's a very vulnerable moment. How do you see vulnerability being key to recovery or to mental wellness?
Wow. It's a great question. I see vulnerability being key to recovery and supporting mental health, in the sense that, so much of how I structured my life was around being dishonest to myself, mainly. Just, you're fooling yourself if you think that you've got the life that you want in so many different ways.
I struggled with the same, man. When I went into rehab, I had written down a list of questions I wanted answered. And the number one thing on my list was why I lied so much, including to myself. I didn't understand how my brain had taken over and had forced the addiction upon me, to the place where the addiction was stronger than my will.
Yeah, it's just like the bullshit just stacks up. It's just like I would lie and BS just because I could.
Yes, exactly. Very Catcher in the Rye. I would lie just because I could.
Yeah, but so that's a part of the vulnerability thing. When I started actually going into the clearing out the attic, there was a lot of junk there. But the other thing too is that I had all this kind of guilt and shame around stuff, and some of it was certainly validated, and some maybe not so much, but it was still there. And the thing was, when I started kind of going in and searching through that attic, it became very clear to me that I had a lot of junk and crap that I needed to clear out. And when you start clearing that out, it's hard, because, a lot of the times you go to people, whether it involves amends or just talking through, taking responsibility for the stuff that you do, and you realize I was a problem, and so much of the stuff that I thought other people were the problem. And
right,
when I started coming to that realization, I realized that, wow, I had set this superstructure around my life that would let me get away with BS until it wouldn't.
right.
And when you start breaking down that structure, and you're able to just be frank with someone, hey, that hurt me. Hey, I'm sorry when I did this. Hey, I can't make this specific event because I need to do this. Hey, I need to take care of myself right now. Things get a lot simpler and less dramatic. And I think I kind of thrived on that drama, though. I liked the soap opera-ness of all the BS that was going on in my life. And for me, it was almost like that entropy that I contributed to, at least in my life. I'm not saying, I'm a bringer of chaos or anything. It's just, I found that when I started clearing away that junk in the attic, I could sleep at night, you know? And
Yeah. And it's interesting because that ability to go be vulnerable and to sort of speak your truth and speak to be known, I it sounds so simple, but it's not. I don't think it's something we're born with. I think we have to learn it. And I wasn't able to learn any of that until someone explained it to me. And I wasn't willing to learn that or hear that until I got to the point where I had to get sober or I wasn't going to live anymore.
yeah, I feel you. I've had those thoughts of suicidal ideation and things like that. And for me, they kind of pop out of nowhere. It's just like, but it was when I was active in addiction. And, I don't know if I'm done drinking and using drugs or anything like that. I don't want to make that claim because I think for me, it's kind of dangerous to make that claim because I will feel I will have conquered something. That's exactly where, your addiction in your thinking wants you in so many different ways, because what ultimately happens then is just like, hey, your brain fools you and says, you got it beat. Now you got to go celebrate. And that's when you do the really stupid stuff.
I like that outlook because I've had people that have considered coming into business with me that have asked me a question. Hey, you've only had X amount of time of sobriety, and then like this is making a long term commitment to you. Like how can I diligence your sobriety? And my answer to that's like, dude, I don't know what to tell you.
Well, it's hard too, because I do have some conflict in that, because I seek to be of service in the program. And outside of that, I do mental health advocacy. And from a value perspective, they're on the same path, but they require exclusive levels of service. And I struggle with that. And, what I need to do at times is just say, hey, I need to just show up to AA stuff. And I haven't always done that. At certain times, I've said, hey, I've got to show up for this nonprofit I work with. I'm working with an organization called Bring Change to Mind, which involves developing and deploying evidence-backed peer-to-peer communities in high schools and universities. It's something that's very near and dear to my heart. And
I love it.
yeah, it's an awesome organization, and it's scaling and growing, and it needs at times kind of all hands on deck to support the growth of the organization when you have hundreds of high schools on the wait list that need to have the programming deployed to it. So sometimes I've stopped myself from going to a meeting when I really need to go to a meeting to do and engage in mental health advocacy work. And so it's weird. And I need to tell myself at times that that's not acceptable, because when it comes to recovery oriented stuff, that's self-care there. It might be healing for me to engage in advocacy around mental health, work with the organizations that I work with, but it doesn't necessarily lead to the level of self-care that I require on a weekly basis to manage my thinking. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man, I totally get it. And I find it hard to keep my meeting schedule up, and the one question that sometimes my sponsor asks me that I feel self-conscious about, hey, how many meetings have you been to this week? And sometimes it's 0, and I'm like, man, I don't know how the week just got away from me and I just didn't go to a meeting. Like, it's not like I can't make time. I mean, it's life or death for me, and I know that. So why didn't I do it? Why haven't I been going to meetings? Sometimes I just wonder that.
Yeah, I can fall in that mode. I think as we're under quarantine now and having to take care of myself, I've found myself participating in a lot more digital meetings because the stakes are pretty high right now, at least in terms of my risk of relapse, etc. And so, I'm feeling pretty great. I'm appreciating participating in meetings close to every day, but this is a super challenging time, and being a participant in the rooms, and now a participant in the digital rooms, it's hard because the stories are cropping up. People are going out.
There's a lot of relapsing going on right now, no doubt.
Yeah, it's happening, and to be active in an addiction in this environment sounds brutal to me.
Sounds deadly to me, to be honest.
Yeah, having had two friends of mine from my 20s, from my New York years, pass away in the past, I guess it's been a week now. So
Oh, wow.
it's real, and they passed away from, a addiction related activity. So it's a thing. I'm hoping, given the circumstances, everything that's going on under lockdown and the like, I hope that coming out of this, there will be a commitment around people who have been struggling to find their footing in the type of recovery that works best for them.
Do you think that coming out of this, there's going to be a little more of an openness to the idea of getting help or to talking about things like addiction and mental health? Do you think that stigma is going to decrease because, of this time, or is it going to get worse?
I think there will be elements of destigmatization that are going to occur as a forcing function. Like, we can't keep on living like this, or what was going on even before quarantine with the stigma. And given the amount of struggle and shared trauma that people are going through right now, it's my hope that people will find opportunities to further connect and to build feelings of empathy and support community development as we come out of this pandemic.
Maybe it pushes us to a place of increased vulnerability, like we were talking about earlier, because we're all experiencing something negative together.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm optimistic. I think that, again, there will be an openness and a want for people to connect. I think that will contribute to destigmatization. I think the thing that's also very important to me is, hopefully people will start identifying their personal biases, and in becoming aware of them, can start unwinding the ways in which they think about others and themselves. Am I confident that will happen? Not necessarily, but I'm hopeful, and I have a hunch that we're going to see a lot more of that.
What are these biases? Like, how do we become more aware of them?
There's dozens of them, right? But if you think about how we perceive the world, and how our personal prejudices and the ways in which we weight certain decisions or data around certain decisions occur, there's been a lot of opportunity to think and ruminate and go through a lot of different things as we're here locked up at home. And I'm hoping that certain biases, like availability bias, in which you make decisions based upon the first things that come to mind, or the limited information that's at hand. Hopefully that will broaden a little bit and become de-biased based upon how people will seek to learn more, seek to further connect. Confirmation bias is something that we certainly see a lot, in which people have their existing ways of thinking that they're going to further reinforce if they've got a strong confirmation bias. That said, I think that this current environment will ultimately broaden thinking, and becoming aware of why it is we're doing the things we're doing is causing, I hope, awareness around how we can change and do things better. I'm saying this because a lot of the processes and a lot of things we took for granted can no longer be taken for granted moving forward.
That's a good point.
I call it systemic embolisms that have been happening, kind of either supply shocks or kind of clogs in the in the arterial system of the economy. And through that, we've been deprived of things as simple as toilet paper, wealth, also personal relationships, human connections. It will cause us, I think, to reestablish waiting on the things that actually matter. So maybe there'll be a bias in that sense, but for me, another phenomenon, which is a type of bias, is something called Occam's broom. Occam's broom is basically taking information available to you, to a person in a decision-making process, and sweeping it under the rug so that they can focus on the things that they want to confirm, right? And the thing for me is I'm hoping that we can expand our thinking so as not to kind of take all the things that we were ignoring and avoiding and sweeping them under the rug, and instead think about, hey, we've got a new understanding of ourselves through as we go through this pandemic, but also of how we've been digesting and perceiving information. Now, granted, this is a pretty idealized approach to things, but I'm hoping that our innate biases that previously put us into a certain mode of decision making will ultimately be recalibrated through this process. And I hope it'll orient us towards being more connected, towards being more pragmatic, and towards being more open. Will that be the case? I don't know. But I think there is an increased probability that things like more connection, things like increased empathy, and things like more openness and understanding of kind of how we have been thinking about things in a prejudiced or biased way is occurring.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are probably unwilling to admit they have biases, and I think everybody has. And I think, if you want to say that you don't have any biases, that it's actually illogical. I mean, we all have preferences for what we're familiar with, therefore we have biases. It's probably going to take some work to get most people to admit that they have bias, and then be willing to figure out how to debias those thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, you could name and claim a bias however you see fit. You could say there's a rule of thumb around bullshit, that you're attracted to, surface interactions and superficiality. That's just superficiality bias. It just so happens that we just came up with that right now. What does that mean? It means you like BS. So I'm hoping that
I love BS when people used to believe mine.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying is that I was biased, and I still might be biased towards people who like to just go over superficial BS. Because it enabled me not to take a look at how I was conducting myself.
Where can people find those opportunities? Let's say you're listening to this right now and you think, man, I need some more vulnerability in my life. Like, where can people find that?
Go out and volunteer. Commit to a program that's of interest to you. Go out and interact with people that aren't part of your friends and family group or in your job, and find opportunities to just learn. I think that's certainly something. Of course, right now we're limited in interaction. It's often digital interaction, but when things open up, I do hope people can find opportunities to connect on a deeper level. But the vulnerability component plays a big role here. Finding courage to share things safely, of course. I don't want people sharing things and then ultimately feeling like their personal health is at risk, but taking the opportunity to go a level deeper. And then when you establish a connection around conversation around that level, that deeper level, then go a level deeper. And if you can, then go a level deeper. Connect on a way that might not have been thought possible. Generally, people are pretty open to it. It can be very dysregulating for some people. And in my case, often I would find in the past, I thought I could only connect deeply with people when I was intoxicated. It turns out that's totally not the case. For me, I found that when I went out of my comfort zone and started trying to just be open, that it led to a whole new ways of thinking and opportunities. And I would say for people to be truer to the version of themselves that is, I don't want to say they want to be, but that is part of their more honest identity, it's important to be vulnerable, not just authentic. The thing about authenticity is that you can go to California Pizza Kitchen and get the authentic margarita pizza. It's not, which is great. And, it's very optimized around its authenticity. It has characteristics that could be seen as authentic. Just like you could be authentic, we could have an authentic conversation, which all the characteristics of the conversation hit all the topics and the traits that seem true-ish to the conversation that we've wanted to have. And so I don't mind the word authentic. I think it's useful in a lot of conditions and circumstances. From my perspective, I think for people to courageously share in a vulnerable way will enable them to find a more satisfying way of interacting with people.
It's almost like people need to really proactively go out there and look for vulnerable, authentic interactions, and that these don't exist in their natural state. Like, we have to really go find them. Would you say that's fair?
It depends. I mean, you can have a great relationship with someone that enables you to be vulnerable and open and strong too. That's the great thing, is that you can be resilient and vulnerable at the same time. It means you just don't respond to shocks in a way that causes your worldview or self to crumble apart. That's the thing I love about my path around recovery, is that it's enabled me to be more resilient while maintaining a vulnerability. That's not to say I can't be a nervous wreck or can't experience anxiety in very acute ways. It's just I can get through it. It's so much more manageable. So, the things that I'm dealing with now relative to these topics that we discuss is related to the problems that I've had in the past, but it's so much different. My life is so much better. I'm happy. And not to say things aren't extremely hard at times. It's just, for me, part of a process. And I have a friend, Raghu Appasani, who I think you might know, Stephen. Yeah. And he refers to the term post-traumatic growth. And I love hearing that, because it's like you deal with adversity, you deal with and confront challenges. And as a direct result of that, you grow as a person. And if you're able to establish that resilient loop, there's no limit to how much you can grow, I think, personally.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Yeah. So, on the positive side of things, I think our discussions around bias and how we think about our sharing or being authentic, true to ourselves, whatever, is things that we can pick apart and find our own version of as we explore and learn how to be more open and vulnerable. Like I said, referring to authenticity for authenticity's sake, I think it's fine. I don't harbor a grudge against the phrase. I just feel that it's been co-opted by brands and corporations to the point where it just is it's just lip service. It's just explaining kind of traits that are a simulacrum for something that feels real. That's what authentic essentially means, right?
That's actually a really good way to describe it. And look, I know we're getting towards the end of our time here. Is there anything that I missed that we should be talking about?
Well, I'd love to hear how you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a grind. I'm 20 months sober, coming up on it here in a couple of days. I've started the podcast, which I'm having fun doing. It's a lot of work, but it's a labor of love, and I enjoy it. It's really more of a hobby. I've got the What If Venture Syndicate that I'm building, investing in startups in the mental health space, which is awesome, and we've had a lot of support. And I've got a little consulting practice that I use to pay the bills while I do these other things. And I mean, it's a challenge, it's a grind. It's hard work to work on sobriety, build a business, and and do all of that during this time that we're living in, where everything's kind of turned upside down. So a lot of things are going well, but it's also, I mean, it's hard sometimes.
I hear you. And I have to say, Stephen, content that you're publishing, the data that you're collating and putting together and turning into a cohesive narrative is awesome. Because
thanks, man. I appreciate that. I really do.
yeah, because you're framing it in such a way where it's accessible to folks who might not have necessarily thought it as accessible. And I think that's extremely important, and contributes ultimately to the stigma conversation and destigmatization in a really impactful way. So I just want to call it out as saying thank you for everything that you're doing with respect to that. It's extremely important.
I appreciate you saying that. And I hope it's helpful to people. I think if people can learn, if people can be encouraged to build solutions that help others, if people can be encouraged to help other people just on a personal basis, then I think we're doing some kind of positive. And like you said very early on, service work is key to recovery and wellness. And this podcast is a little bit of a service effort for me. And so is going out and gathering the data that I'm learning about the mental health space and producing it and giving it to people so they can use it for their benefit. So, it's not always sponsoring people and showing up to meetings and making coffee. Sometimes there's ways to do service work that, looks a little bit more like, digging into an area of expertise of yours, I think. And so that's what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah. And I just want to say I deeply appreciate it. And, the problem of thinking through how we can best contribute in a meaningful way through service is kind of a good problem to have, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
It certainly does sustain me through difficult times. I struggle sometimes with saying, I'm showing up for a given circumstance, and I'm like, it makes me feel so great, but it's also so hard because I'm going out on a limb and helping someone. And, at the end of the day, if it all amounts to nothing, I think the key thing for me is finding satisfaction in that it contributed to my personal support. And that's selfish in some ways, The thing that I found that's important for me, at least in terms of an insight in the past year, is that, I through a lot of the period of early sobriety and everything, I just felt like, oh man, I'm broken and I'm this broken soul and I'm trying to put everything back together and like, I'll find it. And I realized at the end of the day, I was like, you know what? I'm not broken. There's this opportunity to be of help and be of service. And I'm very thankful of that. But also to think about things in terms of broken or fixed for me, it was something that I think was a fallacy in thinking. I think it was just more so just kind of a continuum. And it's just, as I started to kind of gradually improve, things just got better. And I was still I'm still lazy and still, not motivated at times and don't show up in the ways that I need to be sometimes and everything. And you know what? It's okay.
Right. Yeah.
I'm going to do the best I can,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of the battle, and this is something I've worked on with my therapist, is just identifying the way I want to show up and then figuring out how to do that. And hey, I'm not going to always do it. I mean, I lived so many years of my life not even having any clue what that looked like, what showing up in the right way looked like for me.
Yeah, totally.
Well, look, man, I've really enjoyed this, man. I'm grateful that you took an introduction, that you agreed to come on and do this. I'm grateful for all the work that you're doing in and around the mental health space. I'm just thankful that you carved out time to come here and to talk with us and to share your experience with our listeners.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm really grateful that we had the opportunity to speak, and it's really cool that we get to do this.
Zach, thank you again, man. A very special thank you for coming on and being our guest and talking with our audience and sharing and being vulnerable with us. Just grateful to have you, and grateful for all the work you're doing as an advocate in the mental health space as well. Also wanted to say thank you to our listeners. Grateful to have you here. Your support is what makes all of this possible. If you enjoyed our content, we'd be really grateful if you give us a like or a subscribe or a review on your podcast platform of choice. As we grow our following, we're able to bring you more mental health content. And finally, we want to hear from you. If you want to reach out to us, you can do it on Twitter at StigmaCast, Instagram, Stigma Podcast. You can email us, info@stigmapodcast.com, and you can find us on the website at stigmapodcast.com as well. We really want to hear your feedback on this episode or any of our other content. We want to hear what you agree with, disagree with. We We want to hear about what you'd like to hear us do next. But in the meantime, thank you for being here and take care of yourself. Stay well.